Hello and welcome to Election Eve coverage with Benjamin Arthur Boyce, your friendly YouTube sensation. So what happened was that yesterday, the two of the candidates for high office, being Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, made a series of statements or tweets that trigger me. And I have to be completely honest about that triggering because they brought up, Kamala brought up the concept of equity and said that it is not the same as equality. And here's the 1-minute video.
So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests, everyone should get the same amount. The problem with that, not everybody's starting out from the same place. So if we're all getting the same amount, but you started out back there and I started out over here, we can get the same amount, but you're still going to be that far back behind me. It's about giving people the resources and the support they need so that everyone can be on equal footing and then compete on equal footing. Equitable treatment means we all end up at the same place.
Which video doesn't really make sense because the first part of the video is about getting people on equal footing, and then that very last statement of the video is about everybody, working really hard and then arriving at the same place, which is not possible. Sam Harris, in her defense, said that he took her seriously, but not literally, or something like that. Seems like Sam Harris has some some motivations behind calming down the outrage from my side of the conversation, which is against equity, which is, sees equity, sees it as this rebooted sort of communism, this equality of outcome. And other people are like, politicians pander, politicians lie. It doesn't mean that they are actually going to do that. But the way that government works is that it has two basic areas where they really do implement equity. And by equity, they really do mean equality of outcomes. What they actually do is they look at the outcomes and then they try to fix those outcomes within education and then within health. Within Washington state government, it was the health department that was used to smuggle in this equity office, and this equity office was granted power. Now, they've lost a lot of funding because of the response to the COVID pandemic, but they were given the responsibility of basically looking into or looking over every other state agency and making sure that every given policy had an equal outcome. And if there wasn't an equal outcome according to these different demographics, then something was wrong and we're going to need to send you more training, or we need you to, futz with the data to get the correct result. So Kamala using the rhetoric, saying very blatantly, very openly that equality and equity are two different things, and then, going on that little bit of a ramble and then saying that we need to get at the same place is speaking perhaps to the social justice contingent within her party only in order to get voted in. But that party, the Democrat Party, is the one that is putting into practice these various different equity agendas. And you can see that very explicitly on the West Coast, within Washington and California, and within Oregon. These educators and various different health departments and other, aspects of the government, even including the Department of Transportation, I did a video about that a few months ago, are implementing this idea that we need to make sure that every community has a similar outcome. It ignores, in my point of view, human behavior, basic human nature, and it also assumes that government is the one to foster that equality of outcome. I don't think that that's necessarily possible. Taken in conjunction with this short statement by Joe Biden.
On day one of my presidency, I'll put in action a plan I've been talking about for months, already laid out, a national mandate, mask wearing, social distancing, testing, tracing, all things, as President Obama just said, that should have and could have been put in place months and months ago.
You got Kamala Harris talking about equity, and you have Joe Biden saying we're going to do all these programs, we're going to mandate all these things. That in conjunction says to me that this is going to be like a George Bridges administration. George Bridges, the president of the Evergreen State College, allowed this equity agenda to come in and then use that in order to implement his authoritarian will over how the college was to be run. The college originally was about the teachers and the students having the most control over the education experience, and under George Bridges' tenure, it became like every other given college and was about the administration having the power to basically establish a corporatist agenda where education is a service for the students that they're trying to attract and leech their money out of in exchange for this degree that is basically devalued because the grades, the grading, and a bunch of the different policies are kind of eroding the academic rigor that is assumed behind a college degree, or used to be. So that's the short spiel on election eve, but I did want to get into the meat of the matter, which is this article posted on the California Teachers Association, and it's written by Sherry Posnick Goodwin, and its title is Learning, Reflecting, and Taking Action to Integrate Anti-Racism into Our Teaching. The reason I pinned that opening statement to this article is to show you exactly what this equity agenda will be implementing within specifically schooling. And one side note, Katie Herzog does a great breakdown on Twitter about how the equity agenda does have a very bad outcome with regards to education. And then she says that that's not good enough reason to vote for Trump. I assert that anybody who's willing to go along with equality of outcome, that ideology or that idea, that value will inform every other move that they make. Everything will become about that equality of outcome. So even though it might look like we're just looking at these one little data points, here's schooling, here's the Department of Transportation, here's the health department, the entire government structure will be run according to a set of values. And if equity is in those values, then that will end up becoming the strongest value because of the moral imperative behind that to achieve this impossible outcome. And then furthermore, promising to the average user of government services that they should be equal in outcome to everybody else will cause a lot of discontent within the people who are receiving the services because they see that they're not getting a good product, or even if they are getting a good product, they're not having the same outcome as everybody else. That reality will catch up to the people who are being promised this equality, will cause much more agitation within that populace, and then the people who are promising equity will have to double down, and that will basically shape every given policy. That's my argument. Here's the article. Here's a quote. The opposite of racist isn't not racist. It is anti-racist. Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. Now, first and foremost, it's disturbing that a teachers association would be using such poorly thought out logic to forward their agenda. If you're going to accept that the opposite of something isn't the absence of the thing, it's the actual attacking of that positive thing, you're already caught up in this eternal anti-oppression, anti-racist work that causes you to look at racism and see it everywhere with the moral imperative of attacking it at every given point of data, of outcome, and instance. And even anything that's not intentional is still ascribed to being racist if it doesn't actually forward this agenda. If you're not with us, you are against us. And that a teachers association is going to be propping up this sort of logic is disturbing in and of itself. So they open, following the deaths of the certain people who have died, racial and social justice protests are rocking the nation. The longest stretch of such protests since 1960s. The cry for change is of a magnitude that has never happened before, amplified by social media and intense media coverage. Intense media coverage, more like very biased media coverage, deeply felt as people are already reeling from the global pandemic and climate change crises. Calls by leaders and average citizens alike demanding an end to white supremacy equality and the creation of a just and equitable society continue to ring throughout the country. CTA, California Teachers Association, is among those demanding change. Okay, so this is no longer a teaching association. This is an activist association. Activists make demands. Teachers teach. Two different things. So CTA is among those demanding change and believes, statement of faith, that any real change starts with education. So it's not about education, it's about activism. They're teaching people how to think as activists. Any real change starts with education through the power of our educators and schools. Students must learn and understand truth from our history and current events. Okay, so why did these different people die? Right. If you look at why these people actually died that they reference in the first paragraph, you would find that the truth is much more complicated than the activists would have you believe. So you're already running into, you're going to teach truth? No, you're going to teach a specific truth. Students must learn and understand truth from our history and current events. Their education must be inclusive as well as accurate. But what does this mean? Okay, so they're going to problematize it themselves. For educators, it means that we need to embrace multiple factual perspectives. Okay, what do you mean by factual? In our curriculum, and actively work to integrate anti-racism into our teaching. Anti-racism doesn't care about factualness. It cares about outcomes. It cares about using different facts to get a preferred outcome. It's about openly manipulating facts or data to facilitate certain programs, certain diversity workshops, or certain policies. It is a disservice to students when we take no action. We are not fully educating them and are instead perpetuating the status quo. Again, look at that. It is a disservice to students when we take no action. So if you're not an activist, you're not serving the students properly. Even those of us who consider ourselves not racist are part of the problem. Either one allows racial equities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. Basically, you're evil if you're not doing what we say, writes Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. There is no in-between safe space for not racist. The claim of not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. So you can't be innocent. You can't take no action. You have to be an activist. Being an anti-racist educator doesn't happen overnight, of course. Yeah, you have to get brainwashed. It is a process of continuous learning, i.e. being brainwashed, reflection, and acting according to certain precepts. CTA is developing ways to help members hone skills and access tools to become inclusive educators, as well as active, thoughtful citizens. Already we know that you cannot be inclusive of somebody who doesn't get on board the anti-racist so-called train. You cannot include people with views that question yours. So this is not about being inclusive, and it's not about being an actual educator. It's about being an activist. You can't be an activist and an educator. Once you start mixing those two things, it's no longer true education, open education, liberal education. It's not. For me, saying you are an anti-racist is a verb. Again, be an activist, says Tanya Jacko, a teacher leader and member of the San Jose Teachers Association. It's how you live your life and your commitment to think critically about the system and fight the status quo. It's being able to take action and push back on racism. Okay. Think critically about the system and fight the status quo. This is the problem. And I illustrated this as explicitly as I could. Once you make the status quo about fighting the status quo, you're leading to the imminent demolition of every system and every structure. And that's what this activism at root is. And that's what it means to be critical in this context, to fight the status quo, which leads to the status quo becoming about eroding the status quo. Ad infinitum ad absurdum. I'm going to skip down because I don't want this episode to get too long. So talk with students about race. With little ones, you can't be afraid to talk about skin color. You're not just actually talking about skin color, though. We have multicolor, multicultural crayons. And we talk about our images and our identities from coloring and writing. I want all students to leave my class with self-esteem, know they are worthy, and that they are loved and beautiful. Wait, what? Okay, I guess that's fine, but that seems setting them up for narcissism. But I take that very seriously and embed that throughout my curriculum. When I taught upper grades, I didn't just offer students a list of multicultural books. I asked them to understand how the characters are helping dismantle racism. So injecting this activity of corrosion, basically corrosion of this thing called racism that is everywhere. By definition, it is everywhere where anti-racism isn't. Anti-racism itself is nothing positive. It goes out and it corrodes everything. So you have to read that. In order for a book to be good, it has to be participating in this anti-racist struggle. So you ask them how the characters are helping dismantle racism or how they are perpetuating racial narratives. So but you are the one perpetuating the racial narrative by making everything about it. It is not easy to talk about race, continues their article. However, avoiding talking about race sends a message that you are uncomfortable with the topic. So you have to be talking about this all the time, which is so important to students. Wait, is it really important to students? Aren't you teaching them that it's important to the students and then saying it's important to the students to justify you teaching that it's important to the students? This is a teachers' association. Circular logic, I guess, doesn't get into education programs anymore. Remember that conversations about race are not only about color, but also about whiteness. Too often, teachers discuss race without making white privilege visible and subject to investigation. So if you're white, get ready for an entire K through 12 barrage and beyond 12 barrage of your privilege. Like basically, you are not privileged at all if you're white and you're going into these programs. Teaching Tolerance offers the following suggestions for talking with students about race. Acknowledge the importance of race in students' lives. Basically, make race everything so that they go forth into the world and perpetuate all this racial narrative. 2, bone up on the history of race as a social construct and means of control, and use that to control the students by destabilizing their worldview and making it about race. 3, create a safe environment with clear communication guidelines. Sorry, I messed up the word clear. I won't edit that out just to display how imperfect I am. Recognize that disparities exist, but need not persist. Create opportunities for students to speak from their own experience, which sets them up to failure in anything that is science, technology, engineering, and math, because everything has to be about their own experience. Create a generation of narcissists who want to destroy the entire system that affords them to be narcissists. You know what? It's really difficult to be a narcissist in a third world country. So you're facilitating the backward stepping of our entire civilization on the back of what it affords our civilization to be, which is obsessed with identity, not output. Because we have plenty of output here, we have plenty of material wealth, all that's left for us to really care about is our so-called selves. Saying, I'm not racist, or I was raised not to see color doesn't make you an anti-racist, explains Jones. Being an anti-racist is about seeing race, acknowledging the system, and also acknowledging that we have much work to do in dismantling it. It isn't easy. You may be uncomfortable having these conversations, but push through. I totally want to do this because they keep on saying, oh, it's going to be so uncomfortable. It's going to be so difficult. Says Sarah Robinson. I'm sorry, I should probably cut that out. Be very professional. Moderator of the CTA Roundtable, a high school Spanish teacher and Rhododendron Beach Teachers Association member. If you have more questions than you started with, that's good. Be inquisitive, get resources, read books, talk to your friends, colleagues, and people in the community. Educate yourself. Becoming an anti-racist teacher is a lifelong journey. So basically, also check out Teaching Tolerance and Black Lives Matter at School.com. Other relevant sites, along with recommended reading toolkits and more, are listed at cta.org. Black Lives Matter. Okay, so Kamala Harris is on board with equity. I know people are saying, well, the IDW or IDW adjacent people are just being triggered over the equity term and reading all this stuff into it. It's actually a signifier for tolerance for this ideology that does want to dismantle systems. Ultimately, it wants to create, through the education wing of government, a bunch of activists out of a whole generation that won't do anything productive, but will be very skilled at being very self-centered, very shallow, and very destructive. They'll go out in the world, they won't have any skills other than to problematize everything. So that is at the utmost root of what it means to be equitable. That equity is a signifier for an entire system of belief that I thoroughly believe will ramp up under Trump and under Biden. It's in the mix. It's in the water. It's going forward. It'll go forward either with the resistance of people within the Trump campaign, but the people who are pushing this will still be in an agitated state, and the moderate liberals will still not be able to grow a freaking spine and call this stuff out because they will still be scared of being associated with mean, nasty bigot man over here, right? So under Trump, this stuff will proceed in a certain agitated state and will probably create more evergreen-like situations. Under a Biden-Harris situation, I think a lot of people will go to sleep. Maybe the moderates will be able to call this out and grow a freaking backbone because they no longer have to be scared of being associated with the evil guy and call this stuff out. Or from top levels of government, this will be implemented and accepted and turned either a blind eye to or recommended and pushed forward, and then really attach itself to all different levels of government. That is my argument. Kamala is on board with equity. She said it herself. So take that as you will. This is election eve coverage with Benjamin Boyce. Hope you guys are ready for some wild times tomorrow. What do you think's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. How messy is it going to be? I don't know how messy it's going to be. It'll be really interesting. We live in one of the most interesting years in many, many years. So you guys stay cool, calm, and collected. I know I wasn't entirely cool, calm, and collected. I've been a little bit on edge myself, and I need to be more reasonable, and I will work on doing that. But I really do hope that you guys have internal peace and balance in your life so that when things get funky, you know how to get through them in a good way. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Ciao. Sorry, buddy.